Hello and thanks for joining us here on France 24 for France in Focus. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Coming up in the programme, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. The National Assembly votes on a law aimed at ironing out the inequality between men and women in France. And flooding on the French Riviera, the authorities weigh up how best to respond to last weekend's deadly floods. And the capital of chic, we take you behind the scenes as French designer Franck Sorbier unveils his spring-summer collection at Paris Haute Couture Fashion Week. We begin here at the French National Assembly in the heart of Paris, where lawmakers have been voting on a series of measures aimed at making men and women more equal. Well, according to official figures, women earn significantly less than their male counterparts here in France. Just 1/4 of CAC 40 board members are women, and barely 1/4 of French MPs are women. But the French Women's Rights Minister has ambitious plans to make women's rights and gender equality a reality.
For a country whose motto is Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, France isn't quite up to the mark when it comes to equality. French women earn 25% less than their male colleagues, while barely 1 in 4 company board members are female. And this is the woman on a mission to change that. Vallaud-Belkacem is the Minister for Women's Rights, with the remit from President François Hollande to give women parity with men at home and at work.
Our objective is to get equality everywhere.
The 34-year-old French Moroccan, who gave an exclusive interview to France 24, has ambitious plans to get women on an equal par with men and vice versa.
Men and women are not equal in the workplace, and they're not equal in the home environment either, because women still shoulder a lot more of the parental and domestic duties than men. There's clearly a link between the two, and we want to tackle this with legislation to reform paternity leave.
One of the minister's flagship proposals is to encourage men to take paternity leave, in the hope that the 18,000 fathers who take time off work will rise to 100,000. Another of her plans to change outdated abortion laws has already been approved by Parliament. From now on, a woman no longer has to prove that her pregnancy is causing her distress before she is allowed a termination. Vallaud-Belkacem is not the first to try to redress the balance between French men and women. Legislation has been passed before, but so far hasn't made much difference.
The first priority is to apply the equality laws already in place, and we've been doing that for the last 20 months. Legislation was passed to tackle inequality in 2006 and 2010, and it should have imposed financial sanctions on companies that didn't comply. But businesses didn't follow the rules and they weren't taken to task.
Yet there is a long road ahead, and not just for private companies. President Hollande may have appointed a record number of women to his cabinet, but still women only make up 27% of French MPs.
People across the French Riviera are taking stock of the damage after unusually heavy rainfall last weekend resulted in deadly flooding. Well, the Var region was particularly badly affected, and hundreds of residents had to be airlifted to safety. But with 5 million people living in flood zones across the country, the authorities are increasingly of the view that rehousing flood victims in these very same areas perhaps isn't the most realistic long-term solution.
Cars tossed into the river and vans perched in the trees. On Sunday, a huge wave swept through the village of Lalonde-les-Morts in the Var region, taking everything on its way.
I had water up to here. I thought my time had come, that I was going to die.
Christian and Françoise are retired. They haven't recovered any of their personal belongings.
Everything is gone. Everything. We need to find the strength to start over, but you know, we're 71 and 72 years old.
Will you start over in this region?
No, no.
It's the 3rd time in less than 4 years that the Var region is hit by such heavy floods. As a precaution, the government could buy back some properties through eminent domain. A procedure widely used after the Xynthia storm hit the eastern regions of Vendée and Charente-Maritime in 2010. On the night of February 27th of that year, a sudden and extensive marine flood reached the French coast, killing 29 people in the village of La Faute-sur-Mer alone.
These neighbours died, on the other side too, and here our friends died as well.
A few months later, the government identified several hundred houses to be demolished in at-risk areas. The decision caused public outrage in the small town.
This politician will be gone in 2 years, he doesn't care. They have no money to compensate people and they know that very well.
A vast expropriation campaign followed. More than 1,200 properties in those areas were purchased by the government and taken to shreds. Today, nothing's left. La Faute-sur-Mer has become a waste ground.
It was a good solution to demolish some of these houses in areas where the water went up to over 2 meters and where people died. Authorities had to move these people living in those areas. But there were other areas that were destroyed, and there had been barely any water there. They could have saved those houses.
Flooding is the main natural hazard in France. Today, 5 million people live in areas subject to floods in nearly 16,000 towns across France.
Here in France, prison sentences tend not to exceed 30 years, even for the worst crimes. But after nearly 38 years behind bars, one of the country's longest-serving prisoners is now being given a chance to taste freedom. Philippe el-Shekraoui was convicted in 1977 for robbing a bank here in Paris, but he's always maintained he's innocent.
After 38 years, or more than 2/3 of his life behind bars, Philippe el-Shekraoui greets his wife as a free man. Martine spent over 2 decades separated from her husband, bringing up their child alone. Granted a conditional release, he'll have to wear an electronic tag for the next 2 years. But for him, freedom means a new lease of life.
I want to live. What are my plans in this, my real life? Well, first I'll be spending time with my wife, my friends, my loved ones. The next thing will be work. I'm lucky enough to have work, to be working.
On the 18th of September 1975, the 21-year-old Philippe el-Shekraoui and an accomplice attempted to rob a bank in Paris. They were both armed. Over the course of a few hours, they held 6 members of staff and 1 customer hostage. Dozens of police snipers surrounded the building. The 2 men demanded a 6 million franc ransom and a getaway car. The hostages were released in the evening. Their captors were arrested the following day. They both received life sentences. El-Shekraoui had no blood on his hands, yet he spent the following years moving from prison to prison, including 20 years in solitary confinement. A short-lived escape from jail saw his sentences pile up, extending his time behind bars. Representatives for el-Shekraoui had written to François Hollande asking for clemency. He granted a presidential pardon last year. For el-Shekraoui's lawyers, it's the justice system that's at fault, and the fight's not yet over for others serving interminable sentences.
There are many people in the same situation as him, people who no one's talking about. They've gotten sentences till 2050 or 2060. I think it's a real issue in France, a real social problem that we're going to have to tackle with bravery and determination.
During his time in jail, el-Shekraoui tried to commit suicide and had undertaken a hunger strike for 34 days. Yet he'd also managed to complete some higher education and now hopes to campaign against the type of extended sentences that he served himself.
Finally, it is Paris Haute Couture Fashion Week and we are backstage at the French designer Franck Sorbier's collection. Let's take a look and see what he's got on display. What is a fashion show without models? Well, there are plenty of them here. What are you wearing today?
Hi, I'm wearing a dress which is made like in a very interesting way. Like all this top is made of compressed fabric, so it's very heavy because like from 1 meter of fabric it goes to 20 centimeters. So, but it's beautiful, right?
It is indeed. It's lovely. Well, we're going to go meet someone now who's perhaps better known for her singing than her modeling. Her name is Kimbra.
Something that I've done. special experience to be here to celebrate Frank Sorbier's world, so magical and inspired by some of the same things that my music is inspired by, and just to create magic with him.
We're now going to go meet the man of the moment, Frank Sorbier. Let's hear from him what his thinking was behind today's collection.
The collection's theme is Gulliver's Travels. It's like a fantastic journey in countries that don't exist, but with references to dolls, to desperate housewives from the 1970s.
Des sortes de desperate housewives des années 70.
The idea wasn't to do a documentary like National Geographic. It was to go on a dreamlike journey.
Ce sont des voyages imagés, je dirais.
And we leave you here at Paris Haute Couture Fashion Week to end this week's edition of France in Focus. I do hope you'll join us again next week.